The mess hall was quieter than usual, save for the soft clinking of plates and the occasional murmur between the team. Caleb, Argoz, and Evelyn sat at the center of the long wooden table, their postures tense. Around them, members of the pack stood in casual but calculated positions, each one keeping a watchful eye on their unexpected guests. Gunnar leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. His gaze swept over the trio, assessing them. Clara, seated across from Evelyn, leaned forward slightly, her hazel eyes sharp but not unkind. Darren lounged in his chair at the far end of the table, spinning an empty mug in his hands with a smirk playing on his lips. From behind the counter, Bianca served up steaming plates of pasta and freshly baked bread, her calm demeanour a stark contrast to the palpable tension in the room. "You've got two choices," Gunnar said, his voice low but commanding. "You can sit, eat, and talk, or you can sit and talk hungry. Either way, we're going to get some answers." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Argoz, then with Caleb, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Argoz finally spoke, her tone sharp. "Is this your idea of an interrogation? Feed us, then pry into our heads." Darren chuckled. "It's Bianca's idea of hospitality. Trust me, you'd rather deal with her food than her temper." Bianca shot him a withering look before placing a plate of pasta in front of Argoz. "Eat," she said simply, "or don't. Makes no difference to me." The trio hesitated before finally digging into the food, though their movements were cautious. Caleb picked at his plate while his dark eyes darted around the room, no doubt cataloguing exits and possible threats. Evelyn took a sip of water, her posture stiff, while Argoz stabbed her fork into a piece of bread with unnecessary force. "We're not here to fight you," Evelyn said finally, breaking the silence. "We're here to understand what the hell is going on, and from what I've seen, you're just as lost as we are." "Lost?" Gunnar raised an eyebrow. "You think we're chasing ghosts?" Argoz scoffed. "If you're not, then why are guardians involved? Why drag us here? What's your angle?" Melorian, seated beside Eliana near the far end of the table, spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, measured. "It was not we who dragged you here, but your own missteps. You walked into the territory of a pack with centuries of training. Consider yourselves fortunate they showed restraint." "Restraint?" Caleb muttered, his gaze flicking to Clara. "Didn't feel like it when I was face to face with a wolf the size of a damn truck." Clara smirked faintly but didn't respond. Instead, it was Eliana who addressed the comment, her silver hair catching the light as she leaned forward. "You're here because you've crossed paths with something far larger than you realize. And while we could spend this time trading accusations, I suggest we focus on the real danger." Evelyn's sharp green eyes narrowed. And what danger would that be? Gunnar stepped forward, his presence commanding as he rested his hands on the back of a chair. The Black Dawn. The drug they're spreading. The chaos they're stirring. "We're not interested in your bar or your paranoid boss, Rose. We've got bigger things to handle." Argoz's fork paused mid-air. "You think Rose is paranoid?" "She is," Darren said, leaning forward with a smirk. "But she's not wrong to keep her guard up. Question is, are you here because of her paranoia, or because you've got a dog in this fight?" Evelyn hesitated, glancing at Caleb. "We came here because we needed answers. Rose, she doesn't trust you. She thinks you're building something she can't control." "Rose doesn't control us," Clara said firmly. "She's a source of information, not an ally." Argoz frowned, her yellow eyes narrowing. "Then what's your angle? Why the wolves, the guardians, the fortress in the middle of nowhere? You're gearing up for something." Gunnar's expression darkened. "We are, but it has nothing to do with you. Until now." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the group. Caleb, who had been quiet for most of the exchange, finally spoke, his voice cautious. "So what? You're saying Rose was wrong?" "She's right about one thing," Gunnar said, his tone cold. "Something big is coming, but if you're here to find out if we're part of it, You're wasting your time. We're trying to stop it." "And Rose?" Argoz asked, her sharp tone cutting through the tension. Gunnar shrugged. "Rose is useful when it suits her. But this is bigger than her schemes and fears. If she wants to help, fine. If not, we'll handle it ourselves." Mylarian leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Argoz. "Your presence here complicates matters, but it need not escalate them. Tell us why you're here, and what you know of the growing unrest." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her glass. "We're not here for your war. But something's shifting in the shadow realm. We've felt it. Rose has felt it. And from what I've seen tonight, so have you." The air grew heavier as her words lingered, the implications rippling through the room. Gunnar exchanged a glance with Eliana, their silent communications speaking volumes. "Eat," Gunnar finally said, his voice low but firm. "And then we'll talk." As the trio returned to their meals, the pack's watchful eyes never wavered. The questions were far from over, and the answers they sought were more critical than any of them realized. The atmosphere in the mess hall had grown quieter. Plates were mostly pushed aside, replaced with mugs of coffee and the occasional sigh of exhaustion. Evelyn and Argoz sat at the far end of the table, still wary but less defensive. Caleb, on the other hand, looked like he was sitting on a bed of nails, his eyes darting around the room like he was waiting for someone to spring a trap. The wolves, sprawled comfortably nearby, kept their golden eyes half closed, though it was clear they were still watching. Alpha lay stretched out near Gunnar's chair, regal and commanding even in his relaxed state. Beta sat close to Ashley, occasionally glancing toward the newcomers with her characteristic mistrust. Omega, however, had a different energy. Omega, the youngest of the wolves, padded into the room carrying his prized possession. A slightly chewed but well-loved stuffed rabbit. Its ears were frayed, the stitching along its belly uneven. But, to Omega, it was perfect. His tail wagged as he trotted confidently over to Caleb, dropping the toy at the man's feet with a proud thump. Caleb froze, staring at the bedraggled toy as though it might explode. He looked around the room, his face a mix of confusion and mild terror. "What am I supposed to do with that?" Argoz, biting back a grin, leaned closer and whispered, "I think he wants you to throw it." Caleb blinked, glancing nervously at Omega, who sat back on his haunches, tail wagging furiously, his golden eyes wide with excitement. "You're kidding, right? Is this some kind of test?" Darren, leaning casually against the wall, smirked. "Oh, it's definitely a test. He's evaluating your worthiness. Don't screw it up." Caleb shot him a glare, but Omega nudged the toy closer with his nose, making a soft, impatient wuff. Caleb sighed and picked up the slobbery stuffed rabbit with 2 fingers, holding it at arm's length like it was radioactive. "Fine, but if this gets me eaten, I'm haunting you, Darren." He gave the toy an awkward toss, sending it skittering across the floor. Omega's ears perked up, and with a burst of energy, he bolted after it, his claws clicking against the floor. He retrieved the rabbit with triumphant ease and trotted back, dropping it once again at Caleb's feet. Caleb stared down at the wolf, who was now sitting even straighter, his tail wagging faster. "Oh, come on, I'm not doing this all night." "You better," Clara said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It's better than the alternative. If it were Alpha, he'd be testing how fast you can run." The whole table chuckled, even Evelyn cracking a small smile. Caleb, muttering something under his breath, picked up the toy and threw it again, this time a little farther. Omega darted after it with boundless enthusiasm, his tail wagging even before he reached the toy. "Great," Caleb muttered. "Now I'm a babysitter for a giant chew toy addict." Darren clapped a hand on Caleb's shoulder as he passed by. "Welcome to the pack, buddy." Before Caleb could retort, a sharp, buzzing sound cut through the room. All heads turned toward Eli, who was sitting at the end of the table, her tablet vibrating insistently in her hands. She frowned, swiping at the screen. "What is it?" Gunnar asked, his voice immediately serious. Eli's violet eyes darkened as she scanned the alert. "Sensor breach," she said, her tone tense. "Perimeter wards just picked something up near the northwest boundary. Something, or someone, is out there." The room fell silent. Omega, still holding his rabbit, tilted his head, ears twitching as though he sensed the change in the air. Alpha and Beta both rose to their feet, their postures immediately alert. Gunnar pushed back his chair, his cybernetic fingers flexing as he stood. "All right, team, let's move." The war room buzzed with activity as the pack moved with precision, their sharp, deliberate motions betraying years of training. Monitors lined the walls, displaying holographic maps, camera feeds, and sensor readings. The air was thick with focus, the hum of equipment blending with the quiet murmur of strategizing voices. Caleb, Argoz, and Evelyn followed cautiously, hanging back near the entrance. This was their first glimpse into the inner workings of Echo Division, and it was a sight they wouldn't soon forget. Argos's sharp eyes darted from screen to screen, her mind quickly piecing together what she was seeing. "Not bad," she muttered under her breath, arms crossed, "for a bunch of mortals." Evelyn gave her a sidelong glance, her expression unreadable. "This isn't just mortal tech," she murmured, gesturing toward a screen displaying glowing runic symbols overlaying the map. "That's magic, and advanced magic at that." Caleb, still pale from his encounter with Omega, leaned closer to Evelyn and whispered, "Yeah, and it's a little intimidating. How many resources do these people have?" Eli, seated at the central console, didn't look up but seemed to hear them anyway. "Enough," she said simply, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard as she adjusted sensor readings. Clara approached the newcomers, her expression calm but firm. "You're guests here, and that means you stand to the side, stay quiet, and don't touch anything unless told. Understood?" Argoz raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her lips curling into a faint smirk. Caleb nodded quickly, while Evelyn simply inclined her head in acknowledgement. Ashley and DeSera moved to the east wall, coordinating their positions based on the map. Jewel was at the medical station, quietly preparing for any contingencies. Gunnar stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding as he observed the team. The low buzz of a security alert echoed through the room. All eyes turned to the screen, where the entrance camera feed flickered, showing a lone figure standing before the massive metal door. "Rose," Darren muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. Argoz perked up at the name, her smirk widening. "Oh, this just got interesting." Gunnar's jaw tightened as he leaned forward, his cybernetic hand gripping the edge of the table. "What the hell is she doing here?" The speakers crackled, carrying Rose's sharp, commanding voice through the room. "All right, wolves, time to play nice. Open up." The pack exchanged glances, tension rippling through the room like a tangible force. The room fell silent as Rose's voice echoed again, dripping with sarcasm and amusement. "Let's not waste time. You've got something I want, and I've got something you need. Open the door, and let's talk like civilized beasts." Gunnar stood straight, his expression unreadable but dangerous. "All right," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Let's see what she wants." The war room fell silent as the loud, deliberate knocks on the front door echoed through the compound. All eyes turned to Gunnar, who stood stoic, his piercing blue eye narrowing in thought. The tension was palpable, the weight of the knock ringing heavy with both curiosity and caution. Darren leaned back in his chair, his usual smirk spreading across his face. "This is going to be fun," he said, breaking the silence. He tilted his head toward Gunnar, his tone light but laced with challenge. "Mind if I handle this one, boss?" Gunnar didn't move immediately, his mind clearly calculating. "You sure you want to?" he asked, his tone sharp but teasing. "Oh, absolutely." Darren pushed himself up, grabbing his shotgun, Thunderstrike, from the rack by the door. "Might as well stretch my legs." "Take Alpha with you," Gunnar said, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just in case." Alpha, already attuned to Gunnar's voice and the rising tension, padded silently to Darren's side, his massive black frame almost blending into the shadows. His glowing yellow eyes locked on Darren as if to say, "Let's see what this is about." "Good boy," Darren muttered, patting Alpha's side before turning to the door. "All right, let's see who's knocking at this hour." Darren approached the door, his boots echoing faintly against the concrete floor. With a calculated ease, he unlocked the heavy latch and pulled the door open just wide enough to see who stood on the other side. Rose leaned casually against the doorframe, her dark eyes gleaming with a mixture of confidence and irritation. She radiated her usual aura of control, but the faintest flicker of surprise crossed her face as she spotted Alpha standing at Darren's side, his golden eyes fixed on her with an unsettling intelligence. "Well, well," Rose said, her sharp tone laced with amusement. "I was beginning to think you were going to make me knock all night." Darren leaned against the doorframe, holding up the small tracker he'd found earlier. "You could have just asked for the address," he said smoothly. "But I'm guessing subtlety isn't your strong suit." Rose's smirk widened. "And if I had asked, would you have given it to me?" Darren paused, feigning thought. "No, definitely not." "Exactly," Rose replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, are you going to let me in? Or should I start leaving claw marks on your fancy door?" Without a word, Darren stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. Alpha's massive frame moved with him, his unblinking gaze still locked on Rose. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, her confidence faltering under the dire wolf's scrutiny. "You bring all your pets to work?" Rose asked, her voice dry as she stepped inside. "Only the ones with better manners than most of my guests," Darren shot back, shutting the door behind her. As Rose stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the faint hum of activity from the war room became audible. Alpha moved silently at Darren's side, his head held high, his presence an unmistakable reminder of the pack's dominance. But Alpha wasn't done. Before Rose could take another step, Alpha circled her, his movements slow and deliberate, as if appraising her. His sharp golden eyes never left hers, his massive paws padding silently against the floor. When he completed the circle, he paused, his head tilting slightly as if in curiosity before letting out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't aggressive, more like a warning. Rose glanced down at him, her smirk wavering. "He doesn't seem to like me." Darren couldn't resist. "Oh, that's just Alpha's way of saying hello. He's a great judge of character." Alpha, as if understanding, let out a sharp huff that almost sounded like a chuckle. Then, in a move both calculated and comical, he brushed past Rose, his massive shoulder nudging her slightly off balance. She caught herself quickly, her sharp gaze narrowing. "Charming," she muttered, brushing off the invisible slight. Darren grinned, thoroughly enjoying the moment. "He likes to make an impression?" "Clearly," Rose replied, her voice tight. As Alpha moved to sit at Gunner's feet, his golden eyes remained locked on Rose. He bared his teeth slightly, not in a snarl, but in what could almost be called a wolfish grin. Rose straightened her jacket, her composure quickly returning. "So, are we going to talk? Or is your mutt going to keep trying to outshine you?" Darren gestured toward the war room. "After you, but just a heads up, he's not the only one you should worry about." Rose raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she followed Darren down the hall. Behind them, Alpha trotted along, his posture calm but vigilant, his presence an unspoken reminder of who held the real power in the room. The war room buzzed with quiet activity as the team turned to see who had arrived. Rose's sharp eyes immediately scanned the room, her attention snagging on the trio standing near the far wall, Evelyn, Argoz and Caleb. Her smirk returned, though this time it carried a hint of genuine surprise. "No chains?" she said, her tone mocking. "I expected something a little more medieval." "They're not prisoners," Gunner said, his voice steady and firm. "They're guests." "Generous of you," Rose replied, her gaze flicking to Evelyn and Argoz. "Not sure I'd offer the same hospitality." "That's the difference between us," Gunner said, stepping forward. We don't need to play games to get answers. Rose tilted her head, her smirk widening. Oh, I love games, but I think you already know that. Before Gunnar could reply, Alpha let out a soft growl from his position beside him. Rose's eyes flicked to the dire wolf, and for the first time that night, her confidence seemed to waver ever so slightly. Darren leaned against the table, watching the exchange with a grin. Well, this is shaping up to be a fun evening. Clara approached Argoz, Caleb, and Evelyn with a calm but firm demeanour, her hazel eyes steady and inviting. Why don't we step into the other room? She asked, her voice soft but commanding. I think it's time we cleared up some misunderstandings. The trio exchanged glances, uncertainty written across their faces. Argoz folded her arms, her sharp eyes narrowing. You want to separate us? It's not like that, Clara said, her tone unwavering. I want to give you a chance to ask your questions, without all the extra tension. She shot a subtle glance toward Rose, whose sharp smirk was aimed at Gunnar. You'll have my undivided attention. Caleb hesitated, his gaze flicking between Clara and Evelyn. Evelyn shrugged slightly, muttering, Can't hurt to hear her out. Argoz huffed but finally nodded. Fine. Lead the way. Clara gestured toward an adjacent meeting room, and the three followed her, their guarded expressions betraying their unease. As the door closed behind Clara and her group, Eliana turned to Rose, her serene expression masking the sharpness of her words. We meet again, Rose, she said smoothly, stepping forward. And I seem to recall offering you an opportunity to speak openly the last time we crossed paths. Rose's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. I remember, she said, her voice dripping with feigned politeness. But as I recall, you weren't exactly forthcoming yourself. Eliana tilted her head, her silver hair catching the light. I was forthcoming enough to offer you a conversation without strings. Perhaps now you're ready to take me up on that offer. Darren leaned casually against the edge of the table, twirling the tracker between his fingers. Oh, she's here to talk, all right, he said, his grin widening. She just prefers to knock first and leave presents later. Rose's dark eyes flicked to the tracker and she crossed her arms. It's not my fault you lot are so difficult to track down. A girl has to get creative. You call this creative? Gunnar asked, his tone low and sharp. Breaking into our territory, tagging one of my people and showing up unannounced? Rose shrugged, her smirk returning. Desperate times, darling. Eliana stepped closer, her piercing gaze locking onto Rose. Desperation can make even the cleverest person reckless. You should be careful. Recklessness rarely ends well. Rose's smirk faltered again, but she quickly covered it with her usual bravado. Noted. Clara sat across from Argoz, Caleb and Evelyn at the long wooden table, her posture relaxed but attentive. Let's start with the basics, she said, her voice steady. Why did you come here? Argoz leaned back in her chair, her sharp features set in a defiant scowl. You're the ones who dragged Caleb off. We came to find him. And in doing so, you trespassed on pack land, Clara replied evenly. That's not a small thing, especially considering the trouble we're dealing with right now. Caleb frowned. We didn't mean to cause trouble. We just didn't know what we were walking into. Evelyn leaned forward, her green eyes steady. You've got to understand. We've had our share of run-ins with people who aren't exactly friendly. We thought we were walking into another fight. Clara nodded, her expression softening. And instead, you found yourself in the middle of a bigger mess than you realized. Argoz's scowl deepened. We're not looking to get involved in whatever war you're fighting. We've got our own problems. Clara's gaze didn't waver. I'm not asking you to get involved. I'm asking you to understand that we're not your enemies. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension slowly easing. Finally, Caleb spoke up. So, what now? Now, Clara said, we work toward trust. But that starts with honesty. So let me be honest with you. We're not the ones you should be worried about. Rose's sharp gaze darted between Gunnar, Eliana and Darren, her usual confidence starting to fray under the weight of their scrutiny. "All right," she said finally, raising her hands in mock surrender. "You've made your point. I'll play nice. For now." Gunner's icy blue eye remained locked on her. "Good, because the only reason you're still standing here is that I believe you have something useful to say." Rose's smirk returned, but it was weaker this time. "Oh, I do. But you're not going to like it." "Try me," Gunner said. Rose glanced toward Eliana, her expression unreadable. "It's about that little raid of yours the other night. You didn't just hit a safe house, you took the last of something very valuable. And now, someone's very unhappy." Darren's grin widened. "Sounds like a them problem." Rose shot him a glare. "It's going to be an all of us problem if you don't handle it right." Eliana stepped forward, her calm presence commanding the room. "Then start talking, Rose, and don't leave anything out."
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.